What's up, guys? Happy Thursday. Hold on. My phone is ringing. Give me a second. What's up, guys? All right, I'm having one of my best friends from college, Luc Harrington, on. He doesn't sell real estate, but he is in construction defect something. I'll let him explain what he does, but I'm going to have him on in a second. He's one of my best friends from college. Played soccer together, and we've been friends ever since. What's up, Tara? Shalom. Kitty Jack, what's up? Robin Roberts, what's up? Serenity, what's up? All right, so this is what he does, and I had him text me because it's kind of complicated. He's the vice president of Harrington Construction Company, and they're expert witnesses for testimonies regarding construction defect litigation cases. I know that was a really long thing, so I'll let him explain and join. He'll be on in a second. Della Sells Homes, what's up? Serenity Rodriguez Notary, what's up? Let me know if you guys have any questions before he hops on. Let me see if he's around. Let me see if I can get him. He's not on yet. Let's see here. Luke. He's not on yet, but there he is. Be on in a second. Anyway, so again, Luke, he works with this company. It's his family-owned company, and they basically work with clients. There you are.
Hey,
What's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm good.
Welcome to your first IG Live.
Thank you. Let's see. Do I have to request to join?
No, you're on.
I'm on. Okay, we're
You
good.
just have to talk.
Sweet.
Hang out. What room are you in your house?
I'm in I'm upstairs. It's kind of where my work area is.
Bro, are you surprised that Juan is joining my first IG Live ever?
Am I surprised? Oh, hey, Chris. This is going to be
This is very fun. All right, so I was trying to explain what USA Natalie says, thank you for life. No problem. I was trying to explain to everyone what you do, and it was a mouthful. So please explain what you do.
Right. Well, our firm is a family company. It's we started as full service general contractors. So we built commercial, residential, industrial, public works projects, just a regular construction company. But now what we do is we deal with construction defect litigation. And so what happens is whenever there's a construction related lawsuit, an attorney hires us to act as the experts because an attorney can't testify as an expert, and it's kind of our field of expertise. And so they'll hire us to analyze costs, figure out responsibility in terms of who was the party that may have caused a particular issue. But specifically for what I think we'll be talking about today, what we do a lot of, and happens mainly in California because it's a little easier to create lawsuits in California. But
You think?
yeah.
Probably good for your business though.
It is, yeah, and it's funny because so much of our business relies on what the state laws are, because we do work in Nevada and Colorado.
Oh, I don't know that.
Arizona, but Nevada,
expanding.
for instance. What's that?
I said you're expanding. I didn't know that. How long have you guys been working out of state?
Arizona since 2005. Nevada probably a few years before that.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Colorado
So
was about Colorado was about 8 or 10 years ago.
Okay.
But we don't. In Nevada, though, Nevada used to be our biggest state. We had the majority of our revenue came from Nevada, and then they changed their laws. Oh gosh, maybe about 6 years ago. And then a couple years later, because those laws always take a little while to go into effect, really.
Yeah.
But a couple years later, we saw the number of cases that we had drop dramatically. I mean, we're talking like a 60 or 70% drop, just because of law. Yeah, they passed some particular legislation. All of a sudden, it wasn't as advantageous for people to sue, and so they had to find different ways. So
cool.
Yeah, so
awesome.
But for us, I mean, sorry, for you and for today's discussion, something that we deal with a lot, and I've asked for your input on some of these cases in the past, is that we have a lot of cases where a homeowner is suing or purchases a property, and then somewhere down the line they discover some problems with the property, and then they sue the previous owner. So this isn't a new build. This has to be some kind of existing home. And they sue the previous owner for a lack of disclosure. And so there's like all these little nuanced parts to that I think, I mean, you have some expertise in, and like, so a lawsuit's created, and then all of a sudden all these parties are going to be involved. But who's really knows what, I mean, we have to involve a lot of people in order to figure out who's going to receive what and what needs to be fixed and whose responsibility is that. And so, like, I've asked you what your thoughts are in terms of what needs to be disclosed and how much responsibility a realtor has in that.
Yeah.
You know, how much a homeowner has in that. But I think that it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of levels to that, a lot of layers. So
there is, yeah. And so that is like, I always tell my sellers, like, this is the most important form. Like, these two forms, the transfer disclosure statement and the seller property questionnaire, are the two most litigious forms in real estate, because if the seller doesn't disclose enough, and sometimes the sellers will just go through quickly, no, and they don't even really think about what they're doing, and then later on they get sued. So give us some examples. I know the most recent one was actually pretty interesting. I was like, wow, the seller, I think, didn't disclose about like a septic tank, right?
Yeah. So one we're dealing with right now is, we'll see that's where it's a little bit strange. So the seller, in this case, was somebody that was just flipping the home. And so how much do you really know as a flipper? You know, you may know, you're going to rely on previous documentation too. I mean, say this home was built in the 50s, and say there's been unpermitted work on it for, 30, 40, 50 years before you take hold of it. You do work on it for a couple months, you sell it, you fill out the forms real quick, or you have your realtor fill out the forms. I mean, there's a lot of levels of separation there where things can get lost in the shuffle.
Sure.
Yeah. And so part of the onus, we believe, and at least in this case, so there was a home inspection report, which we thought was very professionally done. It was comprehensive. And there were a lot of things identified in that home inspection report that we think that the seller was made aware of. And so therefore, the purchaser was made aware of. And so the seller, in our view, really shouldn't be liable for those items because, hey, look, we told you that this was happening. This was present in the home. You can't 2 months down the line complain, I've got broken tiles in my home. Well, the home inspector told you there were broken tiles in the home. If you wanted to make an adjustment in the price, that was the time to do it at the point of sale, right? Yeah. But like with the septic, if nobody knows that there's a septic tank and nobody inspects and identifies whether there's a septic tank, well, whose responsibility is that when it turns out that there's an issue with the septic tank? Yeah. But then the problem in this case, though, which we've come to find out, is that the seller's real estate agent indicated that it was hooked up to the city services.
Oh, wait. So the agent, who is the listing agent, right, repping the seller. Agent. Yeah. So they told the buyer that it was a city line, not a sewer, a septic.
Not a septic line. That's correct. Yeah.
Where? Like an email or?
No, in a disclosure. In a disclosure. One of the disclosures, there was one of the forms had something that they may have handwritten it in, but it was indicated on one of the forms that was.
That's weird
because it was hooked up to city.
Because the only form that we fill out as agents that we actually have to fill out is the agent visual inspection disclosure.
Okay.
Which is basically anything visual, like, there's a crack on the driveway or a crack on the wall, or
right.
I see a leak or I see some mold or something like that, right? But there's nothing there specifically that says anything about sewer line. The only thing that is specific about, either public sewage or septic is on the transfer disclosure statement, which should be filled out by the seller, not the agent.
Okay.
So maybe the agent filled it out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to look more into that. It was our understanding that the agent had filled that out. But you brought up a good point about what the realtor's responsibility in filling out are what we refer to as patent defects. So things that are patently obvious, things that you can see. Basically, you don't have to do any in-depth inspection. Yeah, so we have patent, and there's patently obvious versus latent. which are things that you would have to like do some kind of destructive or intrusive testing to discover. Like,
okay.
You know, if you have a plumbing leak, but it's not manifesting as a stain or water dripping out, that's a latent defect because you don't see it. But it's probably somewhere down the line going to cause some issues. And at that point, then it comes out and you go, okay. But so, and so let's go with the plumbing leak. Actually, that's a good example. So you have a plumbing leak, you sell your home. A home inspector isn't necessarily going to see something like that because they're not doing that kind of inspection. But 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line, you have this recurring leak. All of a sudden, you start to see a stain in a baseboard or something. And then you remove the baseboard just because you're curious, and there's some mold. And then you open it up, and then, you know, the framing's mold. It's completely molded, right? And you go, well, why I shouldn't have to pay for this. It's, you know? And so that's where a lot of the genesis of a lot of our lawsuits is because all of a sudden something comes up that wasn't noticed before. And you really have to parse out who is the responsible party, and that's not always so cut and dry. There's a lot of, like we said, nuance to that. And
So do you usually rep sellers or buyers?
Both. I'd say about 95% of our cases defense work, which would be on the seller side. The plaintiff work is, you know, a lot less frequent. But I mean, I sympathize for homeowners. I mean, they shouldn't have to deal with things that they don't know about in their homes and that they come up later on.
That's a good point.
Right.
And so the way the disclosures are written, it says, are you the seller aware of? If you're not aware of it, the answer is no. If you're aware of it, the answer is yes, and they explain it, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes sellers forget. If they live in the house for 20, 30 years, they may forget about something. So there's a lot, I mean, and they are always constantly changing those forms, you know, to make them even better, you know, because there's always lawsuits.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of times where, you know, maybe a week after the buyer signs off on these disclosures from the seller, they're like, I forgot to mention this. And I'm like, well, the buyer just removed their contingencies. You know, we have to disclose it now. And if we disclose it now, what happens, right? So there's, you know, and again, this is the most litigious part of real estate are these two forms, right? It's when the seller does not disclose something that is going to, you know, cost the buyer a lot of money, right? So give us some examples of some like crazy stories that you heard of. Like obviously this one with the septic tank, like what's going on with that?
Right now we're saying that we don't have a responsibility to install the septic system, but I think that ultimately we probably will. It's just
really,
I think that a lot of times this becomes just an economic decision. Because litigating cases and going down this deposition and continuing investigation process is expensive. And so you go, okay, well, you know, let's get rid of this and throw some money at it. I mean, that's not ultimately our decision.
Sure.
But I think that, I mean, if it was up to me, that's probably the direction that I would go. But we've got, I think the most interesting ones are ones where a homeowner, we had one several years ago where there was a homeowner who initially seemed, or was at least acting like he wasn't very, what's the word? Sophisticated. And then once we got more and more into the case, he actually started to, because he had done a lot of remodeling on this home. He bought it, he was intending to flip it, a nice home, you know, a couple $1 million home. He was intending to flip it. He sells it to somebody who ends up suing him because they start to do some remodeling work, and they discover that some of the work that our guy had done was subpar or was damaged as a result of some poor construction. And so as we're getting further and further into it with our client, who was the one that did the initial remodeling work, the flipper, he starts to send us these CAD models and these like BIM models that he had created of the remodeling work that he'd done. And so it turned out that his disclosures were almost purposely vague. And so he said, okay, yeah, well, I know that there had been X, Y, and Z done at this location. And then, but it was very like a 30,000 foot view. It wasn't nearly as as detailed as, or as
honest. He wasn't being honest.
I think that's basically what it turned out to be. And ultimately he paid the price. He had to, we were defending him, but he ultimately had to pay quite a bit of money. Because, you know, it turned out that the work that he was doing really had a large effect on, or really contributed to the damage that the subsequent purchaser was experiencing. And so it was kind of funny that this guy who initially was acting like he knew nothing of construction, who didn't know, he was, you know, he was just a guy that was financing the remodeling work. He was never on project. He comes out with basically these very detailed blueprints.
Oh my God.
That he was overlaying rooms and like showing how, I mean, it was kind of funny. I mean, we were probably on the wrong side of that one.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of how it goes. But I think fortunately the right people got the right amount of money in the end.
Yeah. So. Yeah, for sure. So what do you do exactly? So like, obviously you get a call from somebody. Yeah. All right. This is the issue. What's your process look like in terms of like, say for instance, like in that case, like what are you guys doing?
Sure. Well, initially what we have to do is just kind of start to develop our own theories we'll get an overview from an attorney and give us kind of a summary of what they believe is happening. But really our first job is to analyze the documents that we've received and start to develop our own picture of what the case looks like. Most of the cases we deal with are very straightforward. That's not very exciting. The defects are the same. What we can kind of anticipate what the plan of action is going to be just by the clients involved, because we have so many repeat clients. But with the private clients and with single family homes, and especially with these kind of cases where we deal with either a lack of disclosure or a homeowner not knowing what they were getting into, that's really where the real investigation comes into play. And that involves, like I said, ultimately just a detailed analysis of the paperwork. And that's either the paperwork that they've provided us, but then also maybe going into and checking permits, for instance. Because a lot of times a homeowner there could be 4 people that have owned a home in the last 20 years, right? And 3 of those people may have done work that was unpermitted. And then maybe there was some permitted work too, but a lot of times none of that stuff shows up on a disclosure. And so we have to essentially build the story ourselves with whatever information that we can conjure up. So
got it. And are you building the story as an expert for a particular party? Right?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, well, that sounds like we're being advocates one way or another, which we're not supposed to be. Our job is intended to be as neutral as possible. I mean, there's going to be, if we're representing a seller, though, there's going to be somebody representing the buyer that's counter to us.
Okay.
But our job is not to say, oh, our guy did nothing wrong. You know, we're supposed to look at the facts and interpret the facts as they are, basically. Okay. But we're the only ones that are qualified, so to speak, to speak about the facts in a court of law.
Okay. All right. So the main reason why I wanted to bring you on is because, you know, I've never had a dispute in my 15-year career, but I know a lot of agents have, you know, when it comes to disclosure. And obviously that isn't really our responsibility, right? Because we're not writing the disclosures, but it is our responsibility to at least let the seller know how important these disclosures are. Yeah. How important it is for them to be honest about, you know, what they did to the property, right? Yeah. Because a lot of sellers will like, they won't tell us, you know, like, you know, there was, you know, things happening. There was an instance here just recently that I closed a deal in Sherman Oaks, and we were doing a mold inspection. And one of my handy guys was at the property, and I said, hey, you know, how much does it cost to like fix this small repair? Not mold, but just, and then he was looking at this door, and inside this pocket door, he sees the whole like inner wall black. He's like, there's mold in there. It's like, Paul, there's mold in there. Yeah. And I'm like, fuck, I wish he didn't tell me, you know?
Right.
But like, like once he tells me and I look and I'm like, I have to tell my client and like,
Sure.
we have to be honest about it. Cause like,
Yeah.
like what if something happens and somebody passes away because they're really, affected by the mold spores and they can die or
Mhm.
get really sick, right?
Right.
So it ended up costing my client an extra, I think it was 20 grand, 20 grand, If my handy guy didn't see it, we would have been fine, but there could have been something like something could have happened from that, but it wouldn't have
Oh,
been our fault because we didn't know about it, right?
yeah. I mean, not necessarily unless there was some kind of work that your client had performed, which contributed to that mold that
Yeah.
wasn't disclosed.
Yeah.
And so that's where the liability comes in. And so if I'm the purchaser of that property, I do some remodel work soon after I buy it, right? So maybe 3 weeks after I buy it, right? Within a reasonable amount of time. Because I think the time's important in this case. So they open up that pocket door wall, they see the mold. They know that within that short period of time, they were not the ones that caused all of that mold in that area, right?
Yeah.
And so what are they going to do? They're not going to say, oh, well, I guess I'm just going to fix all this mold. They're going to come back to you, right? And so that's where the tricky part is. I mean, let's say that you didn't see it, right? Like you said. Well, and your client didn't know about it. Well, whose responsibility is it then? I mean, should the subsequent purchaser be 100% responsible for the cost to remediate all of that? I mean, that's a big expense that they didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
And they're expecting a home that's minus whatever disclosures have been and reductions in cost for whatever miscellaneous things. They're expecting the rest to essentially be turnkey, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not expecting to go into a home and then all of a sudden have to do a bunch of remodel work that you didn't know about.
Well, yes and no, but the buyer has their chance to do their due diligence, right? To do all their inspections. And they did. They got their mold guy and everything. None of their inspectors saw this.
Well, that's what I would hang my hat on as a seller. Say, look, you guys had a reasonable opportunity to inspect these areas. And so especially if it's visible without having to do kind of intrusive testing. So if your handyman was able to see it visually without having to break a door down or cut a hole in drywall, then the mold inspector of the purchaser had the exact same opportunity to do so, right? Or the home inspector, or the homeowner himself, or the subsequent purchaser, or the purchaser's agent, the buyer's agent. They all had that same opportunity to do that inspection themselves and see it themselves. Yeah. So I think in that case, because most of the time we'll be representing the seller, that we would say, look, there was ample opportunity. This was not a condition that could not be seen without intrusive testing. This is, you essentially bought it as is. And so that's, it's up to you to fix it. So they'll still fight you on it. But I think that is definitely what our defense would be in that situation.
Okay, cool.
But I mean, it's still hard. I mean, how much you want the homeowners, maybe they don't know how much effect they have on a property during their tenure in the house with the work that they've performed. Yeah. And so it makes it difficult to that's just why it's not cut and dry. That's why there's
it's not but the purchase contract, it says as is, like this property is sold as is, and the seller does not warranty anything, right? But there's a lot of gray area, obviously. That's why there's all these lawsuits, right?
But the as is part is dependent upon whether or not the information included in those disclosures by the sellers is accurate, right? And so if it's interpreted that a seller's disclosures are not an accurate representation of what the state of the home is in, then that's where these issues arise. Yeah.
And that's why I always tell my clients, over disclose. Over disclose.
Well, I think that to protect yourself, that's absolutely what you should do. Yeah. And I think that you should, I mean, it sounds like you do, right? Is give the sellers every opportunity to do whatever inspections they want to do, within reason, without damaging
the sellers,
the buyer.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's really on the onus is on them, and if if they have done their due diligence, then really I think that, and the disclosures are as honest and comprehensive as they can be, then there's really nothing else that you can do.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think there's a good lesson in this IG live for both a listing agent repping a seller and a buyer's agent, right? If you're a listing agent, make sure that you tell your client, please read this carefully, take your time, and just write down, like, if you have any questions, like, let me know, but over disclose, don't under disclose.
Yeah.
If you leave anything out, like, this could be a lawsuit. I always tell my clients, like, these are the two most litigious forms in real estate. Please fill them out carefully. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm always happy to help. And I look at every single one of those answers, and if I think there's something that they're missing, I call them and say, hey, you told me about this, but it's not here. I'm like, oh, I forgot. All right, go ahead and change that, right?
Yeah.
And if you're a buyer agent, the same thing. You know, have your client spend money on all the inspections. Like if they're buying a single family house, termite, mold, sewer line, foundation, drainage. I mean, if nowadays here in Los Angeles, like the minimum house is like 1.5 million, right?
Right.
If you're spending $1.5 million on anything, you should like really understand the property. Like, you should really understand what's going on. And a lot of buyers get cheap on inspections because they're like, oh, it's fine. I'm sure everything's fine. This person has been living here for a long time, blah, blah, blah. If they have been living here, we can live in here fine. There's no issues. Yep. And then they come to find out there's some major issues. Like one instance was, I was repping a seller last year, and we were under contract, and the buyer found a huge foundation issue, like cracks. And what are you drinking?
It's raw kefir with turmeric and ginger and cinnamon.
Oh, interesting. Where do you buy that at? Is that a homemade thing?
No, I got it at a place where I work out.
Oh, okay, cool. What I was saying is that, so we were under contract. I'm repping the seller. I didn't rep them when they bought the house. They bought it 3 years ago without me. I didn't know them yet. And the buyer asked the seller to pay for 20 grand worth of foundation work. And my client, I asked my clients, hey, when you bought this house, did you inspect the house? She's like, no. We know houses very well, so it's fine. And we live at the house, and there's nothing wrong. But I'm like, yeah, but you're not thinking about the future, right?
Yeah.
Like, spend the money on inspections. That way, even if you're okay with the foundation, with the issues in the foundation, and listen, the house has been there since the 1920s, right? It's fine.
Sure.
But if something happens, earthquake happens, like there could be some major damage to the house because the foundation isn't right. They were lucky; there was no issues with them. But now that they're trying to sell, now it's costing them a bunch of money, and they couldn't. They lost about like $5 or $6 grand because they had inspected another property that they were purchasing because they thought this was going to go through, and now they lost a bunch of money, right?
Sure.
And I was like, this is why you inspect your property when you buy. Like I'm so. And a lot of agents out there don't know this. Like, they don't know what inspections their buyers should be getting when they buy a house. And it's like, and they don't teach you that in real estate school. Like, you get your license, and they don't teach you, hey, as a buyer agent, you should really highly recommend that your client do these inspections for this type of house. If it's a hillside house, you should probably get a geotechnical, guy out there to make sure there's no landslides, right?
Sure.
If you're buying somewhere where there's flat land, but there's kind of some uneven, areas in the land, there could be a drainage problem. Like we had one here in Venice where there was a huge drainage problem because the land wasn't graded correctly. So when it rained, all the water went straight to the house.
Okay.
So they had to install a sub pump in the middle of the backyard with a huge drain that will spit the water out to the yard, right? So there's so many things that can happen in any transaction. So as realtors, just really, really important, guys, to like know all these things so that you can advise your clients correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that from our end of things, having a paper trail about stuff is, look, people will say things all the time to one another. Like you have your previous client or your client who said, oh, we know houses really well. Well, if they had a report that said from when they purchased the home previously that said, oh, look, the foundation is good. like we've had this comprehensive inspection. They could have given that report to the subsequent purchaser. Yeah. And, you know, maybe it would have lessened the amount of repairs. But if they're just working off of, oh, we lived here, it was fine, nothing happened. No, I'm not going to trust that over what a structural engineer says in a report. And the same thing for us. So whenever we have, if we have one side who's got very good documentation of an issue, and then another side who's got nothing, and it just has, you know, whatever discussions they may have that they've verbalized to us, we have to lean, or we have to respect what's in the papers for this identified and documented. So I think that, like you said, is over documenting and over inspecting. I don't think that you can go wrong with those things. And ultimately, what does it cost? Like you said, I mean, you know, you're talking about a fraction of a percent of the overall purchase of the home. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and then just for sure. And then just for peace of mind for the purchaser, right? I mean, now I know that I'm certain that I've purchased a home, and there are no, like I said, latent issues that I'm going to become aware of. Excuse me, become aware of 6 months or 2 years down the road. You don't want to deal with that. You just want to live in your home and not have to think about things.
Yeah, for sure. How did you guys get into this expert witness? Like, that's kind of such a niche. Like, do you guys have a lot of competition?
No, I wouldn't say competition. There are a handful of other firms who we deal with. You know, 95% of our cases, we deal with the same other companies, other expert firms. Okay. And we got into it, an attorney needed an expert and happened to come across my dad on just on an actual construction site that he was working on. And this was like the mid 90s.
Wow.
And
that's crazy.
Between 95 or so, 95, 96 and 2005, we did about, gosh, maybe 100 cases, I'd say. And then between 2005 and today, we've done an additional 6,000. So
wow, 6,000?
Yeah, so we're at.
Wow, that's crazy, man. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, well, so we stopped doing construction completely in 2005, and so ever since then, the consulting part is taken over essentially. That's but awesome, it's higher margin and less liability, so it makes a lot more sense. So
yeah, for sure. You're not out there buying lumber and dealing with supply. Supply chain issues and all the other shit that has to deal with construction. That's smart, man. That's awesome. By the way, I think you'll be happy to see this.
Hey, where's the rest of it?
You like it?
Yeah.
It's downstairs.
Nice. Today. All right.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited. Luc is a Tesla owner, so he's a Tesla fanboy. I'll be a fanboy here soon.
So how do we do? Does anybody ask questions?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys have any questions, please ask. Again, Luc deals with these kind of disclosures, right? And so he's an expert witness when it comes to any kind of defects or any kind of disclosure issues. So if you guys have any questions for him, please ask. If you guys don't know, I've known Luc since 2001, and I met him when he was driving his expedition that had bags on him. It was pretty dope, man. It was the sickest expedition, silver with like 22s on it, and that thing would drop down to the floor, all the way down to the floor. I think it was awesome. And he'd have this box with him with all these switches.
Yeah.
And then he had you had a sound system too, right?
Yeah.
That was a dope car. I can't believe you sold it and you got an Acura TLC over there. I was like, what are you doing? That was a dope car.
Yeah. That thing was dangerous, is what it was.
Oh, on the freeway?
Yeah, on the freeway. It was like, it felt like it was going to fall apart.
Yeah.
So I had to drive really slow. That was a fun car.
I don't think anybody has any questions. Any last comments about that, bro? About just kind of disclosures or, things that have to do with houses?
No, I mean, I think we touched on how important it is to really make sure that as a seller, you're being as comprehensive as possible. I mean, ultimately, in with our business, both sides generally lose because 95%, 98% of our cases settle before trial. And if you're settling before, and so my dad has testified in 55, I think, trials, and like I said, we've had over 6,000 cases.
Wow.
Right, so that's a tenth of 1%, right, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're settling, most of the time, one side or neither side is going to be completely happy with the settlement, right?
Sure,
you have to come to some agreement, and you're doing that in order to avoid future excessive costs that you're probably going to incur if you go into trial. Trial is really the only time that we see where one side or another side can potentially get a 100% victory.
Got it.
But that's those trials are unpredictable, and it's behooves people to not get to that point. So
is that a trial, like, is just the judge just like
it depends. So we have a bench or a jury trial. A bench trial is just with a judge, or a jury trial is with a jury. That is
really?
just like a
jury trials,
just like a criminal case. It's incredibly boring for a jury to listen to experts talk about construction details. So it really makes sense.
What's the biggest like, I guess, lawsuit you guys have ever been in? Like,
we had
$2 million.
Oh, what?
Like a few $1 million?
Oh gosh, we had one in Nevada, which was the biggest lawsuit in Nevada history. It was, or at the time, or maybe it was Arizona. Actually, no, I think it was Arizona. It had to deal with a bunch of huge developments, thousands of homes. There was a piping issue. The settlement was, on the order of $400 or $500 million.
Oh, so, 400 to 500. Is that covered by insurance?
Yeah. And so what the issue was that the PEX piping, the plastic piping system, the copper fittings were being corroded by corrosive soils, and so basically every single home in these multiple developments had an issue and were leaking. So we were brought in. There was no like liability part of that for us. It was really just to come in and say, okay, how much is this going to cost to fix? And so but that was insane. At the time, at least, that was
$500 million.
Yeah, and at the time, that was I think the largest lawsuit dollar wise. I think it was in Arizona, but it was a plaintiff firm. They often get about 30% of the proceeds. So they had a winning case from the start, and they were gonna make about $150 million. So it was a good deal.
So wait, who was making 150?
The attorneys who were bringing the lawsuit against the piping company. Yeah.
So there's attorneys out there that like will try to find these cases and like Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
I mean, we deal with a handful of plaintiff firms quite frequently for tract homes, and they will literally just send their paralegals out into these tracts and knock on doors and say, hey, you having any of these issues with your home? And then once they get somebody to sign up, then they can say, hey, your neighbors have signed up, and so.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's kind of a necessary evil because it keeps contractors honest.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
true. I can't hear it. Oh, there you are.
It's our business, so as much as we complain about it, it still gives us
for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on, buddy. I really appreciate it. And I will see you Saturday at 5:30 at Mi Piachi's.
All right, we'll be there.
All right, bro.
All right,
I appreciate it, man.
Take care,
man.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.